Good evening. I'm Attorney Lawrence Berliner. I'm an attorney in the field of special education law. I want to thank all of our participants for attending tonight's webinar. Jane and I were talking. We're now in our fourth year of doing these webinars, and we're continuing tonight. We have a panel from Winston Preparatory School supporting students with learning differences in college and beyond. And we'll get into introductions momentarily. With me is our co-host, Jane Faherty, who is the director of the JumpStart program at the Jewish Community Center in Stamford and a special education advocate. Jane and I are continuing to present these webinars because we are part of a larger community of concerned parents and professionals, and we're all still learning how to connect with one another. For the past few years, we've been moderating a series of webinars to address what is continuing to be these unprecedented times to ensure that students receive an appropriate education. And the need to address social and emotional educational impact upon your child's educational journey could not be greater. And we're here to try to empower families for the road ahead, discuss what's on the minds of parents and how to cope. And tonight, as I mentioned before, our topic is to pursue an educational journey for life after high school and college and beyond. Before I begin, I have a disclaimer. And our disclaimer is, number one, this webinar is being recorded. A copy of the webinar will be provided to each person who is registered for tonight's webinar. The information on this webinar does not constitute specific legal, educational, or professional advice regarding you or your child's circumstances and should not be relied upon as such. The webinar does not establish an attorney-client relationship with Attorney Lawrence Berliner, myself, or a professional relationship with Jane Faherty, the Stamford JCC, the JumpStart program, or the Winston Preparatory School. By signing up, you've agreed to receive emails about future webinars and events from the Stamford JCC and the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner. Please note that Zoom, who's doing the recording, is a third party and not an agent or associated with the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner, the Stamford JCC, Winston Prep. Information that we're providing this evening is based upon Connecticut law, policies, and federal law covering all 50 states. If you're watching this webinar from another state or country, we do welcome you. Number one, you should consult the laws and policies that are in effect in your state or jurisdiction. And without further ado, we're going to discuss this evening navigating the college support systems for students with learning differences, empowering students, developing self-advocacy awareness, preparing for life beyond college, struggles for transitioning into the workforce, education, training, and probably the most important part is what parent advocacy and support might be. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Jane, and she can introduce herself and anything new since we were last here.
Hi, Lawrence. It feels like it's been a very busy year this year, particularly right now with PPT meetings happening as people are winding up the school year. I'm looking forward to ESY. So I'm Jane Faherty. I'm the Executive Director of a program called JumpStart, located at the Stamford JCC. And we also have a classroom located in Norwalk at the Maritime Odyssey Preschool. We predominantly look after children with developmental delays between age 2 and 3 and provide them with one-to-one support in a classroom setting. And then we push those children into other classrooms when it's appropriate. I also help advocate for students throughout elementary, middle and high school, and working collaboration and partnership tends to be my style when advocating for families. So it's a pleasure to be back this evening. I can't believe it's been 4 years, and we were just reminiscing. The last time we met in person, Lawrence, to do one of these workshops was actually with our friends here from Winston Prep. So we were all together about a week before the world changed at that time, and it's lovely to see them here again on the screen this time. So without further ado, I'm going to first introduce you to Beth Sugerman, who works at Winston Prep to help parents and support the parents in different ways and with advocacy. So Beth, it's lovely to have you here this evening.
If I may, before we begin, there's just one housekeeping note. We have many questions, but if you do want to present a question, we would ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your computer and not the chat where we've posted our resources and contact information. The chat is recorded, the Q&A is not. Thank you.
Beth, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Jane. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. As Jane said, my name is Beth Sugerman. I currently have a role as Chief Enrollment Officer for the Winston Preparatory Schools. I started Winston Prep in 1997. I am a speech and language pathologist by education and background, and have held many roles at Winston over the years, including head of school at our Norwalk, Connecticut campus in 2007. Excuse me, we opened that. And last year I was provided the opportunity to begin this academic school year as our Chief Enrollment Officer, because we have grown, and we've grown not only with Tabitha Mancini and John Civita, who you'll hear about, but we've grown. We have 5 brick and mortar campuses now, 4 on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, Long Island, and Connecticut, of course, as well as our campus out in San Rafael, California. So we're here to talk about how to prepare your children for the future and for college, which is a huge step and transition, certainly for all students, especially those who learn differently, both academically and in the social emotional realm. And you'll be hearing from John Civita, who has began with us in Winston years ago, also wearing several hats. It's a wonderful instructional teacher. And John was always what I called our Pied Piper. The kids just always flocked to him. And he is a very hands-on type of instructor. And he connected with our students very, very closely, and ultimately began our transitions program, which is what we're here to talk about, because we said, you know, how do we best prepare our students? Winston is a school for students with various learning disabilities, dyslexia, nonverbal learning disabilities, executive function. And how do we best prepare those students with both academic needs and their social emotional needs, so that the trajectory of success that we provide them continues into that next very important step? So I think the most important thing before I pass the baton to John and Tabitha is, as parents, making sure that we recognize our students' needs, to sit with their team of teachers, to sit with those counselors, to sit with professionals who know your children from a different level, but more importantly, how do you know your child from that independence? How independent is your child? And we'll talk more about what that is, how to get there, what skills students are required to have in order to succeed. We have something called our Lives Over Time study through our Winston Innovation Lab. And we really have found in our research that it's the students that have that independence, that have awareness, that have self-reflection, that are good advocates, and have time and management abilities. And we're going to talk about that because without those skills and independence and awareness, a child's in a very unusual, novel environment, and they have to be in charge of a lot of things in order to be successful. So we'll talk a bit more, but I think it's important that you partner with the professionals in your world and you recognize where your child is on that scale of independence. I think that's so important to recognize, you know, does your child, had they been to sleepaway camp? Do they have sleepovers? Can they problem solve academically and socially? So we'll talk a bit more because again, that's how somewhat our Winston Transitions program began. And that's why Tabitha, who is the director of our Winston Online and Winston in College program for students that don't have access to those brick and mortar opportunities in which to target those needs that they have. It's important also for you all to recognize that colleges and universities, as well as transition programs, but it's a little bit different. But when you're looking at colleges and universities, many parents would come to us and say, well, it says that they have a learning support program. And Larry, being the attorney on the screen here, will be the first to inform you that legally they have to. Public Law 94142 indicates that all schools have to present that learning support, but that looks very different in various places. And just a quick little sidebar, personal story, I'd taken my stepdaughter to look at Hobart and Williams, and that was a school that you had to attend, had to go there. It was the school at the time. As we know, every couple of years, there's a few schools that become the IT schools. And she had executive function challenges, and they had been addressed at the school she attended, but it was something that we were sure she would need going forward. And while we visited Hobart Williams, and it's a beautiful school, it looks like a movie set if you've never been there. However, when we inquired as to the learning support program, they kept pointing at buildings, and we said, well, where is it? And it ultimately was a grad student in the garage. And I felt that was not going to be adequate support. So, you know, just be careful when you're told there is support. So do your research, speak to the professionals in your life, and recognize what your child's needs are academically and socially, because the most important thing is continuing that trajectory of success and making sure that, you know, those first 6 months are so successful for them. And we'll talk about what that looks like and what we believe from our experience those needs are. So I'll pass this along to John Civita, and director of our transitions program, both our program in Manhattan, a few blocks from Grand Central, as well as a new program we've opened just recently in San Francisco. John.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, so just to, I guess, piggyback on what Beth was just saying in relationship to my background, one of the other hats that I wear is also a parent of a former Winston Preparatory School graduate, and also a graduate of our transition program. My son was actually in the program my last year as the formal day-to-day head of the program. I am the founding head of Winston Transitions, as Beth described, and now overseeing both operations, the New York campus, as well as the new campus that we just launched this past August in San Francisco, which we're incredibly excited about. So, you know, just to give you a quick overview in relationship to what Transitions does as a day program in supporting emerging young adults, and typically we're working with emerging young adults, the age range anywhere from 17 to 21 plus, and really looking at it as this kind of longer runway in relationship to helping students, individuals, navigate the complexities of adulthood, right? So we're thinking about higher education. That is a very typical next step for so many of our kids, not for everyone, doesn't have to be, and it might not be appropriate for everyone. And understanding that and identifying that is a big part of the work that we do with our families, but also thinking about what happens after higher education. And when we're thinking about life after higher education, I think we would probably all agree and understand that if we're looking at our lives kind of on a plane, the longest span of our lives is spent in employment. You know, adolescence, the years in education are actually quite short. They're important, and they're informative, but they're not the greatest span of our lives if we're living long, healthy lives. Knock on wood. So helping our students understand the skills, and those skills that they're utilizing if they are going into higher education environments are very similar, if not exactly the same, in relationship to the supports that they're going to be utilizing and developing and activating while they're in college, that they're going to be using those same supports in the world of employment and in their everyday lives, right? So thinking about, you know, the complexities of just navigating the heavy decision making that we have to engage in as adults, you know, from financial responsibilities to maintaining and sustaining relationships, and obviously one of the greatest aspects of finding independence in our lives is employment, right? When we're able to have sustainability in employment, that's going to lead us to a much greater chance of having that level of independence that, as a parent, and we're all, we're being parents on this webinar as guests, I would imagine is a great area of concern, right? So for many of us, it's getting our child to higher education, but then really thinking about, or we should be thinking about, what's next. So transitions supports all of that, where the underpinning of social emotional growth and development is paramount to, again, that sustainability, that level of advocacy that is going to be needed for our kids in any environment post high school. And building awareness is really key, right? So that the only way that we can advocate for ourselves successfully is if we understand the areas of difficulty, if we understand our strengths, and most importantly, and I think this is incredibly important for our families as well, is that we understand and are able to identify the supports that exist. And I think to Beth's point earlier, and we'll go into this much more, and I'm sure there'll be questions about this. There are supports in place, but especially in college, even if it's a school that has supports, if it's even an LD specific type of school, the individual still has to seek out that support. That's the realities of adulthood. They're available by law. Often they have to be in place. They might be more significant in certain environments, like schools that specialize with individuals with learning differences. But the child, the individual, the young adult has to seek them out, have to advocate for themselves, has to have that greater sense of awareness so that they can self-regulate in moments of distress, right? We were talking earlier before we got on the official recording of this Zoom about anxiety and the prevalence, wrong word, but there is a perseveration on it as well. But the prevalence of anxiety that we're seeing with our children and ourselves as parents, as adults, and struggling with that. So again, building that is a big piece of the work that we're doing. The employment piece to our internship program is incredibly important, again, to creating this playground, if you will, so that our students actually have a lab, a testing ground to go and explore these skills and have a place to actually make mistakes in a safe, structured environment. As I said before, preparation for higher education is a big part of what we're doing. So continued academic skill development is also very much embedded in everything that we do in the program. That's, again, a kind of a snapshot of Winston Transitions.
Just a quick question. The name of the school
Sure.
in San Francisco is
Winston Transitions as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there's the
And-
middle school, high school is in San Rafael. So there's Winston Prep in San Rafael. That's the middle high school program. And then the transitions post-secondary program that we're talking about, transitions this evening, is the program that John is director of as well.
Right.
Thank you.
And we offer some variations to our program at both campuses. There's the full day program that encompasses full coursework, the internship program, and the one-to-one focus program, which is a hallmark of all of Winston Prep programming. So a student has that built-in advocate so that they can learn to utilize those strategies and those skills and utilize that person as their support person. So they're kind of gaining that relationship and building that familiarity and that level of comfort with a support person, so that they're not shying away from, which again can happen quite often, that feeling of, I got this, I can do this, isn't quite always the case, especially in college. And I've experienced that with my own child, through his experience in college, where there'll be times where he says he's got this, but he doesn't got it, and making him feel more confident that, hey, reflect on the skills that you've learned, and you can still activate those by using them in that moment, and accessing the support people that are at the school. He happens to go to a school that has a wonderful support program that is, in addition to the general program that he's in. But again, the same thing, he has to access it. So that's a really big part of it. So being able to communicate effectively, disclosure is incredibly important going into a higher ed and even the world of employment, knowing when and how to disclose. Again, it's part of that advocacy, how to articulate in a really clear way what your needs are, understanding the laws that exist around your needs, and being able to advocate for yourself. I can't stress that any greater. And not to be afraid of that.
That last point is very important. These laws exist only if people are know their rights and accessing their rights. They're not self-implementing laws. They only work when people know their rights and know how to access their rights when in trouble or in need. So
yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I'm sure John and Beth, you will talk about this in more detail, but as a parent, it is very difficult to watch our young adults and older students have to navigate things independently and not problem solve for them. So I'm sure that you also have to provide a lot of support to parents to know when to take a few steps back, allow mistakes to happen, because it's through those mistakes that we can all grow and learn. But that's also very difficult for parents to do during this transitional period when we've been so involved in our child's education and day-to-day living. It's hard not to maintain that same focus and microscopic attention upon the young adult. So I'm sure that you'll help discuss that piece as we move forward as well.
That's a great
Yeah,
point.
that is a great point. Sorry about that. And I want to move on to Tabitha because
I think our parents are so accustomed to being their child's advocate, and now suddenly you've got to wean yourself away from that role. And that's very, very hard, but it has to take place. It has to occur. And Tabitha can speak more about, the students that she sees both in the online program as well as Winston in college.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. So I'm Tabitha Mancini. I'm the director of Winston Online. Winston Online, we are Winston Prep, but it's through the online modality. So it's completely synchronous, so live classes for live group classes. And then we also have a one-to-one component as well, where teachers work with students one-to-one, which is called our focus program. And our programming is completely customizable. So students can go full-time, we have part-time options, and then we also do have Winston in College, which is where we offer academic support services to college students with LDs, executive function challenges, and also NVLD. So those are kind of the three learning profiles that we work with at Winston, and also Winston in College. I have lots and lots of thoughts of everything that you were talking about. Just a little bit about my background. I did my master's at University of Connecticut, and I focused in educational psychology, transition for students with disabilities into higher ed and special education. I've spent a lot of time in higher ed. I was the director of disability services and also an adjunct faculty member for UConn teaching in that arena. And spent a few years at Landmark College and also working on developing online programs for students with learning disabilities. And I'm now here, been here for a little while with the folks at Winston Prep. And I think that, John really nailed it when you're talking about, the need for advocacy. Definitely, Jane, when you also spoke about parents needing to figure out, when to kind of pull back and what the timing is. I think that a lot of, we talk about transition for students, but we don't often talk about the transition for parents. And so I want to acknowledge that, because I know that there is a really big transition for parents as well. As their student is in these new environments, in whether it's career or higher ed, they're students are learning independence, but parents are learning right along with them their role as well and how to do that. I think that that understanding also the differences in the laws, and Larry, you can talk a lot about this, but the really true differences in that there's model differences in K through 12 environment and a higher education environment. So, we're looking at a success model where we do everything that we can because we guarantee a student an appropriate education. Where in college, it's really more about accommodations and anti-discrimination. And so really being informed and understanding, and you kind of wrap your mind around those two and really understand those two differences, because one is about success, right? And the other one is about really accommodations. And so you have disability services. Their main focus is really to decide what accommodations a student should receive, what's appropriate for them, and making sure that those are properly implemented. A very, very different roles. And I think also, John and Beth both spoke about being able to really understand yourself. So because it's incredibly important, especially when you're moving on to higher ed, because that's the whole model, is to be able to understand yourself and advocate for what you need. And so it becomes completely the student's responsibility. So as many opportunities that we can give our students, our children, opportunities to be able to self-advocate, to be able to practice their independence in all spheres of their life, the better off they're going to be when they need to do that in college.
Just a technical question, Tabitha. For the online portion, do the families need to be living in any particular state to register to participate in your online academic programs?
They do not. So both in Winston College and our 4th through 12th grade programs, they can learn anywhere because it is online. Thank you for asking that question.
And Tabitha and team do a great job of working with various time zones. I'm very impressed with their scheduling acumen.
Yes, we work with students here in the US, but also internationally as well. Mm-hmm. So we have an international presence, and so Winston, just to talk a little bit more about Winston College. It really goes beyond tutoring. And so, what we're looking at is not only helping students academically with reading or writing, note-taking, those kinds of things, but we're math, but we're also helping them socially, emotionally as well, with that self-advocacy, with self-regulation, being able to self-reflect, understand others, how to navigate relationships. That's also where a lot of students get tripped up, is trying to figure out how to establish relationships in this new environment, maintain them, and also that that includes professionals as well, and how to do that with their faculty, which is extremely important. So we're working in kind of all domains with students.
And I think that so many parents, going back to Jane's point earlier, and how you've been your child's advocate for so many years, and I know many parents are their children's scheduler, and this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, this is what you have to do, and you really have to start removing yourself, because your child is about, as I said, to enter, if they're going into that college direction, or even to more of a transitional gap year program, they're still going to be required to be independent in getting there, being on time, getting their tasks completed. The internship program that we provide is a great opportunity for that experience. A lot of kids, when I was a kid, many years ago, at 16 years old, we all worked and we all went to school. And, we navigated both of those responsibilities, and for a variety of reasons, that's not as available to students today, and 16, 17 high school students. So also just not having that experience. So anytime that you can provide your child and give them the opportunity to schedule something on their own, to, go shopping and pick up those things, make a meal. And sometimes people say, oh, those life skills thing, that's not for my child. But they do need to have the awareness in which to at least know how to do these things. And I think that self-regulation piece that Tabitha mentioned, and those of us that work with kids with LD and parents on the screen that understand students with learning differences and social emotional self-regulation challenges. One of the questions was, how do we keep a child, from away from all those temptations? Well, now's the time to talk about that. And to recognize that you have to do your schoolwork first, and especially kids with executive function challenges who have trouble initiating those tasks and completing those tasks, making sure that do they have a schedule now that they're following that they can implement on their own, that they can create on their own. So you've got to start, think about those skills that are required. And as John said, and we tell our kids at Winston, I always say, these aren't Winston skills, these are life skills, right? This isn't just about the next trajectory because you're all, college bound and that's what your drive is, or you're looking into the career world, or you're looking into a transition program, whatever that next step is in your trajectory, you're going to need these skills no matter what it is. So we have to, you as parents have to start kind of letting kids, providing those opportunities for them to practice those skills. And it's hard because again, you've been that person, and I know that you're in charge of the household and making these happen. But for kids with learning challenges, without that practice, John used that word earlier, that practice, it becomes a bit more challenging for our kids. So we have to get that in sooner than later.
I think that too. I just want to
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I definitely appreciate the point that you just were making, Beth, about being able to understand, themselves, understand what's going on around them, and learning, life skills, adulting as they call it now. Even understanding what medications that students are on, who their doctors are. It was really, students who are coming into college many times don't know that information, and they need to. And so, how to navigate making a doctor's appointment, because there's health centers on campuses, and that's one resource that they're going to need at some point. So just even things like that, I think we don't think about as parents, because we just naturally are in this cycle of those are things that we do for our students. And the other opportunity is in an IEP meeting as well, and teaching children that they do have agency, and that this is really about them, and being very student centered, allowing them to be able to run at age appropriate their IEP, be able to create agendas, talk about what accommodations that they have, what's working, what's not working. And that takes training, it takes time, like John said. So I think the IEP process is just such a wonderful opportunity. That opportunity is there, it's part of the process, and it's just such a great opportunity to be able to practice, that, and build that agency, and build self-awareness.
I think this leads in quite nicely to a question that we had before the webinar, and it kind of brings the pieces together. How can parents, educators, clinicians, and the community they've been involved in help prepare students for life beyond high school? What questions, what agencies, what individuals should be brought around the table to start looking forward? And how far in advance would you recommend that families start to engage in these conversations?
Well, Jane, to answer that first, or the last part of that question, rather, as early as possible. Honestly, I mean, typically by law, transition planning should begin around the age of 14. Does that mean that your child has to stay on that trajectory? Not necessarily, right? But as long as you're identifying that there might need to be an alternate plan in relationship to what your child's going to do post high school, then the less, in some cases, resistance. Oftentimes we meet families in the 11th hour where they're just realizing, or they've kind of known all the way along, but either weren't getting the right information, the right advocacy, the right support or data from their current school, and they find themselves in a position where now they're, informing their child that you might not be going to college along with your peers or like siblings or other family members might have done, and you might need more time. There's nothing wrong with that. It just can make it a lot harder for that person, that individual, to accept that. So if you're having these conversations much earlier, it allows for that time to process. It allows for that understanding. Again, goes back to that sense of awareness that we were talking about. You're positioning them in as part of the conversation, right? You're bringing them to the table. And that's something that we always want to engage our kids in, our students in, so that they feel like they have a sense of agency, right? Even though ultimately, as parents, especially under the age of 18, we know best, maybe, against our kids' beliefs. But it is important that we are making those decisions, but again, including them in that conversation at least, and helping them understand the process, as I said. So that's a big part of it.
For our audience, I just wanted to point out that in the chat section, there are many resources besides our contact information. And one of the documents is from a university, I think it's called McAllister University, which I find helpful because they explain the differences between high school and college in very black and white, simple terms. Special education is an entitlement, an IEP, rights. Going off to college is much different. And that leads to the second and third publications that are in the chat section. There are two publications from the United States Department of Education explaining rights under Section 504 or Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act or Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act in a post-secondary setting, otherwise college, community college, wherever one is going after high school. And the third publication involves the types of accommodations and aids and services that colleges or post-secondary schools have to provide to students. We use words like reasonable accommodation, reasonable modification. Well, that's not the same as what's in a student's IEP. And it's very important not only for the parents to know the difference, but their children to know the difference. Especially, I have a lot of parents say, well, when I was in high school, well, your being in high school many years ago is not your child's being in high school. Many parents aren't aware of the transition obligations on the part of school districts. Many parents believe, well, I went to high school for 4 years, I got out and went to college. Well, maybe life was a little simpler back then, but it's become more complex today. When we heard at the beginning about the anxiety that's in our society, some of these student health service centers in a survey reported between 30 and 40% of moderate to severe anxiety in college. And the services to address that level of anxiety is not there. And that's why it's very important that students understand how to manage their life away from home if they're going away to college. And I can't stress enough how important these resources are in the chat section. There are many other resources on the State Department of Education website on transition planning, and that's ct.gov. There's a very large publication on the US Department of Education, which is ed.gov. For transition planning. It's about a 30-40 page document on transition planning. And having as much information as possible as students, as parents of students with disabilities, allows everybody to make informed choices and deal with what might be a curveball that might come your way. You may not go off to college after a traditional 4 years of high school, but you're going to go off to college. Maybe in 5 years. And that's why it's very important that parents and students understand an entitlement to special education through age 22. And another thing, which is a cold water splash in the face of parents, at age 18, your child is now considered an adult. And it's very important to understand that colleges don't want to deal with you. They want to deal with your 18-year-old. And that 18-year-old has to be able to step up and take responsibility for their care, feeding, education, self-advocacy. We heard self-advocacy many times, very, very important. And many parents will say, well, the colleges know how to send us a bill for tuition. I said, that they know how to do, but they don't want to talk to you about your child's education. And that's why it's very important that you try as best we can to send your child off to college with as many skills as possible.
And the right fit, right, Larry, right. And to make sure that, you know, and that's exactly right. Make sure that you're investigating as deeply as possible. As I said, you know, what do the accommodations mean? Describe your child honestly, because again, that trajectory for success is what's most important, not the name of the college. Where it's not necessarily where, make sure they're going to the what is available to continue your child's success as a learner, and that will support. There's various forms of support. So do your investigation to make sure that your child's needs fit into what is available in the particular school or program that you're investigating.
Understanding that everybody is unique and everybody's experiences will be tailored to meet them. What would a typical transition program look like at Winston Prep? What could parents expect a year or 2-year program to look like?
Oh, that's great. So yeah, you're right. It could be a year. It could be more than 1 year for any individual, and that we often assess as we begin, you know, even in the admissions process, but working with the child. So there's not always a clear, definitive answer to that. We've had students come to us and say, "I need more time. I need another year," because they realize there's still more to do and they're not ready yet. But as I said before, we, you know, as for Winston Prep, for our transition program, we do offer a full day program where there are 6 courses that the students are engaging in, language arts, math from a very practical application approach. So a lot of financial literacy, money management, practical, again, you know, thinking about space planning and, you know, all things that we do as adults in relationship to utilizing numbers and number sense, continued reading and writing comprehension, skill development. We have a course that we designed called Professional Studies, which is really a kind of a deep dive into career exploration, understanding how to create resume, cover letters, email communication from a professional standpoint. We do a business expo where the students are creating products, actual products, and creating team activities, and everybody taking on a role in relationship to the work that they're doing on that team. We are creative projects, which is a great way to explore executive functioning, skill building through the creative lens. We get a lot of creative kids in our programs. So we want to, you know, make sure that we're helping them understand how to utilize that aspect of their lives. And if creativity isn't something that they identify with, how to use and tap into it in a way that can be really effective. Focus, as we said before, contemporary issues, I think, is incredibly important these days, especially in regards to, as we were talking so much about anxiety. We're being inundated, I mean, constantly with really challenging information. There's so much going on in the world right now. It almost feels like the world's on fire at times. And we want to make sure that we're helping our kids, you know, process that information in a really healthy way, make informed decisions. So again, thinking about all the things that we have to juggle, right, as adults, and we have to be able to position our students in that. So that's a big part of it as well. And then the internship piece, where 2 days a week, typically, our students are placed in a wide variety of internships. We're finding the internship placements. We're looking at it primarily on a need basis, quite honestly. We look at their level of interest, certainly, but that doesn't always align with where they are right now at this point in time and the reality of what they need. So we want to make sure that we're tapping into those skills, those soft skills. How are they communicating in a professional but also interpersonal way in the workplace, which is incredibly important. You know, when employers are hiring, they're often looking for those innate soft skills, right? Because you can train somebody on a specific task. It's much harder to train somebody to be a good communicator, to have interpersonal skills. You often have to bring that to the table independently. And employers look for that a lot. I know I do when I'm hiring. We can teach how to be a good Winston teacher. We do that really well. So that's a big part of it, and that level of independence that our students feel from those experiences. We've had the ability to not only just the commuting, which is tremendously valuable, because oftentimes they've never done that before, especially kids that aren't living in the city, coming from that. We have kids coming in from Connecticut, from Westchester, and getting on the Metro North, coming into Grand Central, as Beth said, we're a few blocks away from there. That alone is this great leap into independence, and bringing the parents back into the equation, right? It's often the parents that are more terrified. I know when I put my son on the subway for the first time alone, we were frightened, but he learned to now he goes all over the place. He's flying places by himself. He's, and that was something we never thought he would really be able to do, and he's doing it incredibly well. But again, and we see that time and time again with our kids, these little things that seem simple to us on a day-to-day are these leaps into independence, these leaps into real, significant growth. But it also provides an opportunity to fail, as I said before. And we kind of often forget about that we want to shelter our kids from failure way too often. I'm sure you probably heard, there's the helicopter parent, there's the plow parent. That's a fairly new term over the past few years of wanting to plow, clear the way of anything that's dangerous or uncomfortable for our kids. We can't do that. And we have to, as Beth was saying before, and Jane, to your point, right, we have to create this system that works for the family, where they can wean off of that kind of level of protectiveness and feel comfortable letting someone else do the heavy lifting, but also more importantly, that their child is doing that. And all the things that we were talking about, the points that Tabitha and Beth were both making in regards to all the little things that we have to do as adults, it's providing those opportunities. And the internship plays a big part of that. The work that we're doing from a socialization point, it's more organic, as opposed to setting up play dates and interaction socially. It's really urging and pushing the kids to find that urgency, right? To find that kind of intrinsic drive, if you will, to want to be more social, to ask somebody for their number so they can text them. And we've seen that happen time and time again, where relationships are building and they're having these lives outside of school and outside of their families, which is incredibly important.
We have two questions.
I digress.
No, that's right on point. We have two questions, and I'm going to combine them into one. Does Winston assist students who might not be going to a traditional four-year college and maybe a trade school? And the other question is, can you participate in the Winston preparatory school program and still be in college at the same time?
Well, Ed, I'm going to answer the last question first, but I know Tabitha wants to jump in, but I do want to share that that's how Winston and college started, was that our graduates were reaching out to their teachers from college saying, can you help me? You understand me, you get me. And that's one of the reasons that we started the program. So I'll let Tabitha take it from there. But yeah, any student, as we said, we have international students, we have students from all over, both in our Winston online program as well as our Winston and college program. And some students need an hour a week, some want 2 hours a week. It's that executive function and that social emotional piece. Those are the two main reasons that kids struggle those first years and first experience when they're away from home and on their own and away from their supportive teachers. Remember, not only are you as parents supportive, our teachers are supportive. So just kind of, having a familiar face, or at least a person that's familiar with your learning profile is so important, which speaks to the original question was, sure, we look at a student's cognitive profile, we look at their academic profile. Whatever their trajectory is what their trajectory is. That's what we're supporting. That's how we started the transitions program. Some of our kids we felt weren't ready for college, or they said, we're not ready yet, I need more time. So both Winston and college, Winston online and Winston transitions have all evolved from our experience with our students. So we're happy to talk with folks about, helping your child reach their potential, whatever that may be and whenever that may be.
You mentioned executive function. What kind of supports are out there for students who have executive function needs that affect their education and life, I guess.
Tabitha?
I think it depends. Sure. It depends. I mean, there's coaches, there's mentoring programs, there's a lot of different types of programs. One of the things that will also trip up a student is it's just sometimes difficult to use if you are a student with an LD or really struggle significantly with executive function. Then there's a math center, there's a writing center, there's disability services, there's there are all of these services, and they may not have experts in that particular student's needs and the way that student learns. And then what they have to do is try to, one, make an appointment, navigate that space, and also explain how they learn. And if they're having a hard time explaining that anyway, it's going to really, really be difficult. But you're managing all of these spaces as well. So being able to work with a person who really gets you, understands your learning profile, and is really skilled, and I would say even artful in knowing how to be able to use these opportunities, those moments where they may be working on math or they may be working on writing, to also work on independence. And again, I think I can't say enough, self-reflection and really understanding yourself, because I think also I'm just going to create the moment, I think, to just explain or put out there that when a student receives accommodations in their freshman year, that is not set in stone. So it should not be a menu. There are some traditional accommodations that lots of students get, but it shouldn't be that the menu approach. It's definitely also individualized. So all the more reason why students really need to know themselves very, very well to be able to explain what works and what doesn't. And so while they may know, they figured out some things in high school, when the context changes, that learning environment changes, it's knowing, do they have the ability to recognize that there's a difference, be able to understand how they learn, and then be able to create systems for themselves that work and really monitor themselves. And that's a skill that is really developed over time. And, that is one of the things that Winston does. We're experts in, really. And it does take time. It happens over time. And then going back to, being able to identify your resources, who know how to use your resources, know how to interact with those people. So a lot going on. So yes, at the end of the day, Winston does offer opportunities to work with your students when they're in college, anywhere.
I think this segues into a question we received before the webinar started. A freshman, it's difficult for these young adults. They are used to being at home, where we as the parents might tell them, okay, we expect you in at this time, we're able to monitor, have they come in at this time, what time are they leaving the home, and so on. So for the freshmen, how can we help them learn self-control with newfound freedoms, where time management as well as access to social elements which they might not have been privy to before? How do you suggest that parents support their children in those social situations where they have access to things that might lead to more dysregulation?
Well, again, I think it's, as we've been discussing how, the difference between college and high school, right? The parent, while the child's in high school, still has some control, obviously, not always, but some control, and more information, right? More access, hopefully. We know at Winston, we certainly are heavy on communication with our families in all of our programming. And that's a big part of how we are, again, keeping our families informed in relationship to our students' progress and growth and development. In college, that doesn't exist. And, you often don't know what your child is up to. until unfortunately maybe they've made some bad choices and they're home and no longer enrolled in that school. So, I think it goes back to, and you just used the term, dysregulation. And we've said self-regulation so many times throughout this conversation because it really is at the heart of especially in regards to executive functioning challenges, right? That ability or that skill development around self-regulation so that in moments of decision making, and they're often, especially in college, and well into adulthood, as we've said numerous times, that you're able to, in that moment, allow for that time to process. So again, it's as often as possible, providing opportunities for your child to self-regulate, to be reflective on the things that they've done. We don't have to shelter them, but allow them to understand the mistakes that they've made, be very explicit in relationship to the natural consequences that are going to exist. And that's really a big part of it, right? We often look at, especially when our kids are going through primary years of education, we're using grades and reports and all these different things to, kind of carrot and a stick our way through our relationships with our children, hoping that they're gonna understand. And there's value from an external motivation standpoint to that. But ultimately, going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier in regards to intrinsic motivation, right? Helping our kids understand their role in the decision making and the actions that they're taking and the implications that are going to exist. Again, the weight of the natural consequences in life from decisions that we make or lack thereof are heavy at times. So we want to make sure, again, that we're, as parents, and there's no magic formula to this necessarily. I think it is just being very transparent, being a good, strong communicator, having strong conversations, vulnerable conversations at the dinner table as often as you possibly can, being open and aware. My wife and I have always, just on a personal note, we've always said to our kids, you go out and try, you always have a place to come back to. There is a safe place. But don't be afraid to explore. Don't be afraid to take chances as long as they're thought out. And again, you're being self-reflective through that process. So, being aware of what's happening around you and the decisions that other people are making and how that's going to impact you. It's unique and it's individualized for sure.
So this kind of goes to a question we've been given tonight in our Q&A. For a child who's high functioning and won't quite need legal guardianship, but isn't able to make smart decisions, studying versus doing screen time, for example, or remember to take the important medications independently, how best can parents help them once they turn 18? And you alluded to the fact that when they're 18, we don't have privy to information as a parent. This clearly is a situation where a parent and others like them are very concerned about some of the real practical implications. Are there mechanisms in place in transition programming or college that can help with this oversight?
I can answer that one, and Tabitha, I know you'll probably have some more insight into this as well. Not know about all colleges, but I know certain colleges, especially colleges that have support systems in place, your child can allow access to a portal, grades and other information. But again, the child has to be willing to do that, right? So they have to sign and say, yes, I'm allowing my parent to have, they're going to give you the password to the portal and go in and be able to see what's going on. Tabitha, you might have more to add to that from your experience. But that's something that I know exists. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would say that different colleges and university interpret FERPA differently. And so that's something to be really aware of too, is what those limitations are as far as getting passwords and having, to what extent, if a student signs, to what extent that you can have information about your student. So just to put that out there, there aren't as many resources as far as actually executive coaching, executive function, support at a college level, unless you're looking, if you're finding a specialist and someone who works in that arena. I would say that you know, it definitely, the student has to be on board with really also wanting that help and wanting to do that work, because it is work. It's definitely work. And so they have to be on board with that. And I think, you know, we were talking about earlier as far as, you know, parents being in charge and how to have conversations with your student. There's students, they don't want to hear from mom and dad saying, you need to be more organized. You really have to take your medication. You really got to you got to turn that in on time. They just don't want to hear it anymore. They've heard it enough. So I think that relationship really changes, and understanding how to shift and have different conversations with your students once they're adults. And that's a lot of work for parents too, if they're not used to, many of us, we're not used to that new kind of relationship. And so I think that it becomes a lot more with parents as far as coaching, helping the students to realize what's going on, asking a lot of questions, and really, again, making it really student focused and figuring out what their motivation is and talking with them. So it's really talking with them instead of talking at them, and then helping them to work through and figure out what's going on, and then offering support in whatever way it is, whether it's, you know, additional professionals, you know, figuring out what supports are around them, and then, you know, supporting them in choosing to go to whichever professional, whatever support system that is available to them.
If I could just add to that, the legal dimension to that question is a legal guardianship. We did get a question earlier about an education power of attorney. And from a practical point of view, it's very easy for me to advise a client, go into probate court here in Connecticut, get a conservatorship, voluntary or involuntary, get a legal guardianship. Let's draft an education power of attorney. The problem, a small p problem with any of those approaches, we're not encouraging our young adults to make decisions, responsible decisions for themselves. In effect, we are infantilizing them as young adults. So for me, as an attorney, it's a needle that I thread very carefully to try to do as little harm as possible to a student's ability to make decisions for themselves. If they have problems for medical care or medication, maybe that I don't want to have a debate in an emergency room whether the student can provide informed consent. So I might yield on that one, but making educational decisions, releasing records, accessing passwords and parent portal, that should be an informed conversation back and forth between the student and the family, and if necessary, the college administration, because eventually our young adults are going to take, we hope, take over, you know, complete responsibility for their future, and that's, you know, that's why I said it's a needle that I have to thread very carefully as a lawyer, because it's very easy for me to say, let's get a guardianship, let's get a conservatorship, let's get a power of attorney, not fully realizing that there are consequences when we take that kind of decision-making authority away from a young adult.
Another question we had in tonight was, we're very lucky to have you on board with our webinar tonight, and you have tremendous experience and expertise in this field of transitions and higher education. For families looking to find special services programs at different colleges, how can they vet and how can they discern what is a good program versus what isn't, from an unbiased place, besides going to the K and Y guide that doesn't always list all the schools? What advice do you have for those parents?
Ask how many students they have in their caseloads. How many students, how well resourced that their disability services department is absolutely number one. So if that department is well resourced, then it's going to be a lot easier for them to be able to work more extensively with your student, and also offer things that are more out of the box. And so then they have time themselves to reflect and really look at that documentation very thoroughly and work with the student and have more in-depth conversation. That's number one. Look to see what types of, what kind of just the other resources on campus, as far as writing centers and math centers, and who is it all, students that are doing that, or I would keep wanting to say coaching. Yes, coaching, and tutoring, doing that tutoring, or are there, professors involved, people who are setting up programs? What type of training programs do they offer for those people working in those centers? So again, how well are they those centers supported as well and funded? So I think that is really definitely the key, to know what resources are available and to what extent.
And
I
visit.
think also, I got it, Beth.
Yeah, I'm sorry, John. To say visit the schools, and when you're there, and what you also have to recognize is also for the application process, kids with learning differences often have to apply to have a different application, an additional application to the main application. And so there are lots of moving pieces to this. It's not, as you all know, it's complicated. But definitely visit the programs. And as Tabitha said, I want to see the building. How many students do you support? Who's teaching the students you support? Is there a building, or is it a garage on the campus? What is it? And I think those are the first questions to start with. And then if you get answers you like, then I would visit the program and see if you could even speak to some of the students that are in the program. Colleges love, schools love to show off the kids that are within their programs. So I think talking to the students would also be beneficial.
Yeah, I think also asking, how long those support programs have been in place is a good place to start too. Understanding the level of sustainability. Sometimes, unfortunately, they phase programs out. So you might enroll in a school where there's a program in place, and then midway through your child's tenure at that school, it might no longer be, it might be phased out. So you want to make sure that it's something that's been around for a while, that has a good track record. There's some levity, but those are some good starting points as well.
Go ahead, Jen. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, is it realistic to expect this kind of support from community colleges?
I think it depends on the community college. I think, again,
it totally depends.
You have to investigate schools very greatly. That's why it's a lot of research. And there are some very good programs now with students on the spectrum, and that have a really solid understanding of those students. There are good support programs with students with executive function. Again, and I think that's something else. We mentioned the word skills. Tabitha mentioned that earlier. You may want to say, well, are you just going to be, is it a tutor type of thing where you're just going to tutor and help my child with their homework? Or is there someone that's going to help continue the trajectory of learning the skills in which to navigate time management and in which to initiate tasks? That's probably not accessible in most places, but it depends, because there are schools, you can Google tonight, schools for, colleges for students with learning differences. And there are some schools that are really focused on, that have a lot of support versus those that have more minimal support. But it all depends upon the advocacy of your child. Word of the day.
And I think the same thing. It depends on the level of readiness, right? Community college, just like a 4-year institution, is requires the same level of readiness. I've been a proponent of community colleges for our kids coming out of transitions for many years, because often it does provide a little bit of a softer kind of launching pad, or entry point for students in higher education. They can go in and take a couple of classes. Sometimes they can, take non-matriculated courses to start. They do have, in many cases, good disability services, but again, you have to be able to activate them. You want to be that known person in that disabilities office, where you walk in and they all know you by name. So those are important things. But again, if coming straight out of high school, if the child is presenting anything that, you know, is not representing a level of independence, they're not going to have that success, no matter where they're starting. So those things are incredibly important. And I think going back, when, you know, Jane, when you asked me about, you know, who, you know, kind of like what the program transitions looks like, we do often get inquiries from families where kids have already tried college and they weren't successful. And, you know, oftentimes they'll look at our program and go, oh, well, it's too structured, you know, which I want it to be incredibly structured, but we have recently, in the past year or so, started developing some other options for individuals in those positions, because the buy-in from the student is incredibly important, right? So if a student is saying, no, I don't need that anymore, we want to be thoughtful about that. So there are opportunities for students to engage in the internship piece of our program, along with everything. It always includes focus sessions, because it's such an important piece of the work that we're doing. So there are those options. We do offer focus only as well in person. But again, you know, I think the impactful piece of the internship and having somebody to be that support person while the student is navigating that is incredibly valuable. So we're piloting that this year in New York, where a few students are doing that, and all the three of them that are currently doing it have come out of pretty complicated situations in higher education where they failed out fairly quickly because they ultimately were not ready. And kind of the handwriting was on the wall prior to going in. But again, you know, I think the families and the student found themselves in a position where they didn't know what else to do, and also figured, well, let's give it a try, which is okay. But understanding, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, that, you know, oftentimes when that level of readiness is really apparent, it's telling you something that you need to be looking at a different pathway for the moment. And again, thinking about those skills that we've been talking so much about tonight.
I'd also like to just mention, you know, dual enrollment courses. A lot of community colleges,
Yep.
All have most have dual enrollment options, and as soon as a student can be exposed to different aspects of what a college life or college class is like, and the demands, the better off they're going to be. So early exposure is really important. So in whatever ways that we can create those opportunities is so valuable. And even if a student's going to go to a 4-year, go visit your community college, visit your local community college, explore it, talk to people, you know, see what it's like to maybe you can audit a class. I mean, just see what types of opportunities for early exposure that your community college has.
Yeah. I think the dual enrollment program piece is important. We've been engaging in Landmark's dual enrollment program since the very beginning, and Winston as a high school does as well. I've always looked at it as an assessment tool. You know, it's an opportunity to use it as data collection, right? So that as educators, we're then able to provide our families and our students, most importantly, with informed, you know, perspective on what they're capable of doing in a structured environment, but independently, right? And if they're struggling with one college class independently, whether it's, you know, asynchronous or in person, we do have in-person options as well. You know, there's good information there to help not only decide the runway, but also then, as we were talking about before, in regards to just, you know, identifying appropriate schools, right? So then it's not only, you know, the credits are great, right? Because our kids can leave with a good number of credits depending on how long they're with us, which is a bonus. But more importantly, it's that information, it's the feedback, which, you know, to me always is top priority for the work that we're doing, right? Whether it's in the internships and employment, from a social emotional perspective, and from the academic perspective, the work that we're doing is driven by feedback. Progress is driven by feedback, right? Our kids are going to grow because they're getting information on a not just in a minute to minute basis, right? So time, you know, when we think about feedback, timeliness is beyond important, right? So we have to be able to, you know, be in that moment with that person and provide them with that feedback. And unfortunately, you know, from probably all of our experiences at some point in time in our lives, we didn't get appropriate feedback. In employment, unfortunately, a lot of employers don't know how to give successful feedback. And again, so, shaping our kids' understanding of how to to not only understand feedback, but if they're not getting it, again, going back to advocacy, everything always comes back to advocacy. If they're not getting that feedback, how do they then ask for it in a really appropriate way, in a significant way? And then what do they do with it? Are they utilizing that information in a way that's going to help them, again, move forward, grow, and progress? And that's in higher education, that's in the world of employment, and that's in their everyday lives. If you're not getting feedback in a relationship, the relationship could go sour pretty quickly if you're not providing feedback, right? So there's all these different nuances to how we navigate the world of adulthood.
We're getting to the end of our webinar this evening, but I just wanted to get through to very quickly 3 last questions. One question was translating 504 IEPs from high school to college. It should be understood there are no IEPs in college, but the IEP can be used to develop a plan of accommodations for college. That's number one. And then we had 2 questions, which I think are a little outside the zone of our 3 guests, and that's dealing with school districts that are not doing the transition planning. So if you're attending a public school, as John mentioned, starting at age 14, transition planning is supposed to occur. We have, and I hope it's on our chat section, a link to ct.gov. That's the state website. You want to look for the State Department of Education. They have a transition bill of rights for students age 14 and over. Our State Department of Education has core transition skills, which is a booklet on what the State Department of Education has as far as expectations. Also on the State Department of Education website are resources for transition programs. Winston Preparatory School is a resource, but there are many others as well. And so in effect, I'm saying there's not a one size fits all. And so parents and students, especially if they're on the eve of being young adults, need to figure out what their path forward is. Are we going to college? Should we start small at a community college? Are we not going to college? Is there another path forward to employment and success in life? And what the transition planning process is supposed to do is prepare students to further their education after high school, hopefully become competitively employed, and have the skills necessary to live independently. So I don't know if Jane, Tabitha, John, or Beth want to add to that, but those were my comments on response to those questions that came in.
No, just one last question is regard to financing. Would the executive functioning coaches be considered school expenses that the 529 plan can pay for? And does anybody know of any scholarships that might be available for the students or the profile of students that we've been discussing for some of these programs?
I don't know. Go ahead, Civita.
Well, I was going to say, again, for individual executive functioning coaches, I'm not sure about the 529. I know that as of a few years ago, I don't know how many now, 529s have been able to be applied to our transition program. Families can also seek funding through IDEA and FAPE as long as there's not a high school diploma awarded. So that is something to certainly consider. And again, going back to what we were talking about before and to the point of when to begin transition planning, that certainly helps, that process. If you feel like your child needs something more and, the cost of it is going to be impactful on your family, there are, again, rights that exist. There is a process that you can engage in that attorneys like Larry could support. In helping your family find that pathway. But 529s in relationship to individual coaching, I'm not sure.
I would encourage folks to also contact their state's Department of Rehabilitation, and see what types of services are available, because they do vary greatly between states. And sometimes, it's especially in California. I am familiar with DOR in California, and there are lots of programs and opportunities to support students in, if it's tutoring or coaching, books, all kinds of assistive technology even. So definitely contact your Department of Rehab for your state and inquire about what types of services that they might qualify for.
And in Connecticut, that's the Bureau of Rehabilitation Services. That's the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, which is a state agency here in Connecticut. I want to thank our three guests, John, Tabitha, and Beth, for staying overtime tonight, answering questions that have come in. I know we haven't gotten to all questions, but I hope we got to most of the questions. We have posted several times resources on the chat. One person said it wasn't showing up. I hope it did show up. Our contact information and the resources that I had mentioned earlier. So I want to thank John, Tabitha, and Beth for their presentation, for their dedication, I might also add, for advancing not only the rights of students with disabilities, but increasing the educational opportunities for students with disabilities, both at the high school level and beyond. I also want to thank Jane for her collaborative efforts, her insightful thoughts, comments, practical advice. And I also want to thank my daughter, who's off camera, because without her and her tremendous efforts, we could not put these webinars together. She's your contact person for all these webinars. And without her yeoman efforts, Jane and I could not do this. So we hope you have found this evening's conversation informative. Please remember, we have a YouTube channel for the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner for previous webinars and recordings. Jane and I will be keeping a watchful eye on developments in the field of special education. And we'll be planning some future events and webinars. Check our Facebook page, websites at the Jewish Community Center, Facebook page of the Law Office of Lawrence Berliner. Again, I want to thank everybody for being so responsive to our series. So we hope that you'll continue to stay well and connected, and stay tuned for our future webinars. So with that, I'd like to offer Jane, Tabitha, John, and Beth opportunities to offer their closing remarks.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here tonight with you again, Lawrence, and to be at the end of another school year. It's flown by. They seem to get quicker and quicker, bizarrely. But I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I think it's been an incredible conversation and much needed information shared with our families. I too would like to thank Rachel. Without Rachel and also Debbie Berliner, Lawrence's wife, the webinar series would not exist. They work incredibly hard behind the scenes to connect us with our co-hosts and to do the research and to do the posting on the social media. Another location to look for is JumpStart. So I do have a collaborative relationship with STAR, who are a wonderful organization, and we provide not only this webinar series, but also social recreational activities for parents and caregivers to come together and connect in person and to do fun recreational things at no cost or expense to yourselves. So please look at those opportunities on the JumpStar's Facebook page or Instagram account. And that's also where you can find information about the webinar series. So it's been an absolute pleasure, again this year, Lawrence, to be collaborating with you. And if any families need some support and advocacy or advice, don't hesitate to contact me or to reach out to Larry as well. We'd like to support you where we can. And I'll hand you over to Beth. So thank you so much, Winston Prep, for being with us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you, Team Berliner. to piggyback Jane's comments that Debbie and Rachel have been very valuable members, and we do appreciate all of your webinars, your topics, and helping families, helping students, helping professionals. Just, you know, the collaboration that you provide for all of us is so appreciated. And I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. I hope you found it helpful. You know, our website is available and you can learn more information about us. But as I said, just, you know, Google and, you know, reach out to us with any questions you have outside of Winston Prep, because we, as you can see, we like to talk about what we do. And, you know, where everyone on the screen is here to help families like yourselves and help your children be the best they can be and reach their potential and navigate a very complicated labyrinth. So we're certainly happy to talk to you and direct you in the proper direction so that you can help your child to the best ways possible. So thank you all for joining us. Civita?
Yeah, no, I thank you. You've said much of my thoughts as well. So I'll echo many of that. But, you know, yes, thank you to the Berliners and Jane for coordinating this and providing us with this opportunity. We do, as Beth said, hope that it is incredibly informative. These webinars are always, I personally follow them on LinkedIn as they come up and find them incredibly useful. So hopefully as parents, you are as well. And hopefully you found our time tonight to be informative. And as Beth said, you know, yes, we are here to help in any way we can and guide. And I've always appreciated that myself personally as a family, as a parent. It takes a village, as they say. And we need to keep communicating and sharing and, you know, building a world that makes sense for our kids. And that's what we're doing. And we need all of you to do that as well. So thank you. Tabitha?
Just everyone was exactly. I echo all the sentiments. I would say that, you know, this is a community and there are people who are lots of people who are incredibly passionate about people with disabilities, and just finding those communities. Sometimes it's, you know, can be a little bit of work, but greatly appreciate opportunities like this one, this webinar series, to help people find their community.
Very well said. And with that, we wish everybody a good summer, safe, healthy summer, and we will look forward to these webinars next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.